Good evening, everyone. My name is Phil Weiser. I have the pleasure of being the dean here at Colorado Law, and tonight we are in for a special treat. I have a former colleague of mine, a former colleague of Helen Norton's, who's now our labor secretary. It's not often you get to introduce someone who is truly a lawyer's lawyer and a good advertisement for what it means to be a lawyer. Tom Perez really represents the best of our profession and represents what we'd aspire to have in a cabinet secretary. He is an incredibly decent human being, a true public servant, extremely talented, smart, hardworking, and cares about the workers of this country. He wanted to come here to Colorado, where he worked after law school. We're hoping maybe he will be a little bit affected still by Niwat's curse, which is the apocryphal idea that those who come here never want to leave. So once your term is up, if you're looking for opportunities here in Colorado, let us know. We are so glad you wanted to talk about what for him has really been a mission and on leadership, building companies, and caring about your workforce. Let me give him the floor. He'll say a few words. We'll then have a little bit of a fireside chat. We have two very special guests from two of our great companies, Rally Software, New Belgium, Brewing. And then for all of you in the audience who are thinking about your questions, we're going to have two of our students. I think, is it Chris going to be helping? Chris taking the pictures, Ed Yael, and Christine will be handing out cue cards for folks to ask questions. So without further ado, Labor Secretary Tom Perez.
All right. Thank you, Hey, good evening, or almost good evening. It's great to be here. I always like to know who the jury is. So how many of you are law students? Okay, a few. How many are business students? Okay, not as many. What about like engineering students, I'm told? Wow. So, okay, so you're aspiring business leaders, or are you aspiring patent lawyers? Or both? They're not mutually exclusive. How many of you have ever had a course from Helen Norton? Okay, we have to have a separate sidebar afterward, because I don't know how long your file is on her, but my file is very long. And so that's a separate conversation. And then folks from the faculty or the community, right? Okay, excellent. It's great to be here, and it's great to be back in Colorado. I clerked for Judge Weinshank back in the day in the 80s when I had hair and no replacement parts. And it was a great pleasure to live here and to work with her and learn from her. And she taught me more than anything that it's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. She was fundamentally decent, smart, and incredibly effective. You know, I have the privilege of serving as the labor secretary. And before that, I worked in state government as state labor secretary, and before that in the civil rights division, and I was in local government as well. And in other words, it's really hard for me to hold a job, ironically, as the labor secretary. And, you know, one of the things you do in this job is you make house calls. And from these house calls, you learn an incredible amount about the resilience of American workers, the ingenuity of American business, and, you know, the challenges that exist in our country today. And I can't help but start with some stories, because the stories of people that I meet are truly remarkable. I met a guy named Robert a while back. Robert is a line worker at the Nissan plant in Mississippi. He is what they call a permatemp. Permatemp, if there ever was an oxymoron, the word permatemp is an oxymoron. He's a permanent temporary employee at the Nissan plant. And he has to work 70 hours a week to make what the perma employees make in 40. And in fact, he had to train some of those workers. And in fact, they have them wearing different shirts. And those of you who are studying culture in a workplace, reflect on what that tells you about the culture in that workplace and contrast it with New Belgium Brewery. We'll get to that in a little while. I was in Detroit with Mayor Mike Duggan, and we were doing an event with the Fight for 15 movement. The Fight for 15 movement is more than a number. The Fight for 15 is about a fight for dignity. And I met some fast food workers. And there was a woman that I met who's a mother of 3. And she's working 2 different jobs, trying to make ends meet, and she's basically making the minimum wage. And the night before I met her, she slept in her car with her 3 children. That's what she did, because she'd gotten evicted from her rat-infested home. And then I met, in Connecticut a while back, I met a woman whose story sticks in my head because I'm the parent of 3. And she had just given birth. Corrine is her name. She had just given birth to a daughter. Her husband is disabled and unable to work. And she was at wit's end. She didn't know what she could do. And as a result of that, what she did, she's a school bus driver. And so what she did was she took her newborn and brought her on the school bus 2 weeks after her newborn was born, because she could not afford not to, because there's no paid leave. We're the only industrialized nation on the planet that doesn't have some form of federal paid leave. Used to be Papua New Guinea, and I would talk about Papua New Guinea in the United States, and somebody cornered me afterward and said, Papua New Guinea just passed a law. Stop disparaging Papua New Guinea. That's an aside. And so just imagine this. You're working, you're getting on your school bus, your kid is 2 weeks old, you're strapping her in, you got kids who are sick or getting on the bus. They're getting on the bus because their mom or their dad doesn't have paid leave, and so they got to put the sick kid on the bus or else not work and not make money and not pay a bill. These are 3 very typical stories of what I see in my travels and in my house calls. And what they all have in common is, folks, we can do better. The richest nation on the planet. We can do better. We've made a ton of progress in this recovery. And I often remind people, when we have the forgetful coalition, of where we were and where we have come. You know, when the president took office, we lost, there was over 2 million jobs lost the 3 months before he took office. Roughly 800,000 jobs a month that this economy was hemorrhaging. Roughly 7 job seekers for every job opening. Now we've had 71 months in a row of private sector job growth, over 14 million jobs. The best year ever last year for auto sales. And you remember what some folks wanted to do with the auto industry. And we see so many other indicia of progress in this nation. Our unemployment rate's now 4.9%. It was heading toward 10% when this president took office. I meet so many people who got kicked to the side of the road during the Great Recession and are now back on their feet. But what we understand, and the reason why you have anger out there, and it's understandable anger, is because we've got unfinished business. And the unfinished business is the unfinished business of shared prosperity. It's making sure that the rising tide lifts all the boats and not just the yachts. It's about making sure that everybody who works hard and plays by the rules can punch their ticket to the middle class. It's about what the social compact in the 21st century looks like. And the challenges that we have, those 3 stories I told you, it does not have to be like that. When Dr. King wrote his famous letter from the Birmingham jail, he talked about how justice doesn't roll in on wheels of inevitability. Well, nor does economic progress roll in on wheels of inevitability. It is the function of conscious choices and conscious leadership and conscious capitalism and conscious partnership. So if you're a lawyer in this room or a would-be lawyer, you have skin in the game. You have an opportunity as a future leader to shape this world. If you're an engineering student and you're going to be in a startup someday, and I was just at the Silicon Valley meeting with all sorts of startup CEOs a couple weeks ago, having this identical conversation. How do we build long-termism into what we do? And the good news is I see it everywhere. I see businesses who understand that we need to reject false choices. It is a false choice to suggest that I either take care of my worker or I take care of my bottom line. or I take care of my customer. We live, as Kim Jordan of New Belgium Brewery has taught us, we live in a stakeholder economy. And when you adopt the stakeholder model of governance, then you create win-win opportunities. And the stakeholder model says that shareholders are best served when all stakeholders are well served. That's what Kim does at New Belgium Brewery. That's what so many other CEOs that I've met are doing in large businesses, small businesses, folks in between. I met a startup when I was in Palo Alto a couple of weeks ago, Honor.com, home health industry. And they're calling their workers employees and paying them benefits because they want to be built to last. And they understand that if you're cycling through workers day in and day out, you're not going to build a business to last. As someone who's the son of a mother who spent the last 6 years of her life dealing with Alzheimer's, I remember vividly, we wouldn't have wanted 7 different people coming in any given week. And so we see the opportunities. I see these remarkable people who are leading through this approach of conscious capitalism, rejecting the false choices that I just talked about, and really putting forth business models that understand that, you know what, the high road is the smart road. And the race to the bottom is a very dangerous race. And I could give you example after example of businesses that do that. Do you have Shake Shack here in Colorado yet? Shame on you. Don't tell the First Lady. It's very caloric. But, you know, one of the most successful IPOs in 2015 was Shake Shack. Danny Meyer founded Shake Shack in New York City. And I had lunch with him a few weeks ago. He's also trying to do away with tipping in his high-end at restaurants. I mean, that is $2.13. You know, when we had the storm last week, tipped workers were getting screwed. That's a term of art because they weren't making any money. And Danny Meyer, when we had lunch together, he said the following. He had just had a meeting with all of his Shake Shack managers in D.C. And he was asking them, why are we doing so well? I was told that the D.C. market was saturated and you couldn't do well. The answer he got from everyone was, that's because we pay above the minimum wage. We understand what Henry Ford did 100 years ago. You know, when you pay people well, you get a loyal workforce. You know, he doubled the wages of people on the assembly line because he had 300+% attrition. Can't run a railroad, can't run a car company, can't run a small or large business with 300% attrition. But he also understood macroeconomics 101. Consumption is 70% of GDP. And when you put money in people's pockets, guess what they do with it? They spend it. And so the anger that we see here, the palpable anger, is an anger that's a function of the fact that over the last 4 decades, we've started to see a fraying in the social compact. We see prosperity that's not shared. We see the fissuring of the workplace. When I was a kid, you know, baggage handlers were middle-class jobs. But most airlines, with the exception of Southwest Airlines and a couple others, they've contracted that out. So now they're minimum wage jobs. And by the way, you know, the most profitable U.S. carrier over the last 10 years has been Southwest Airlines. Once again, you know, when you have that stakeholder model of governance, you can make real progress. So these are the choices, and many of you are going to be future business leaders. And I'm looking forward here in a couple minutes to talking to our colleagues who have put this ethos into action. And it seems to me that what we want to do is figure out, you know, what are the core principles? And there was a guy named Leon Sullivan, who in the 70s, he was a prominent African-American minister. He was the first African-American who was on the board of a major Fortune 100 company, GM. And he articulated a set of principles that were in place that enabled us as a nation to move forward in the anti-apartheid struggle. And it seems to me that as we deal with this issue of how do we build an economy that works for everyone. How do we take the fact that the Wall Street bonus pool in 2014 was roughly twice as much as all full-time minimum wage workers earned in 2014? Process that one. How do we address this? How do we address this ethos that exists in some corners of our country, which says if you burn out your neighbor's candle, it makes your candle shine brighter? It's not what my parents taught me, and I suspect that's not what your parents taught you. And how do we do that? And what Leon Sullivan did is he came up with a set of principles. And those principles were remarkably impactful. And it seems to me that as we think about this, and as you think about this as a lawyer, or as a future business leader, or as a future professor, or as a current business leader, I hope we will think about some of these principles, because principles drive policy. Principle number one, no one who works a full-time job in this country should have to live in poverty. Principle number two, if you work hard and play by the rules, you ought to have access to a basic safety net. Related to that, we all talk about let's put family first. We hug our family during the holidays. If we really mean that, let's put it in action. Let's stop being, the only nation on the planet that doesn't have some form of paid leave. Principle number four, we need to reject false choices and embrace a stakeholder model of governance. The false choices that say, if we unionize, that's going to be the end of our workforce. The false choice that says, if I address safety, it's going to come at the expense of my competitiveness. All these false choices, these truisms that actually aren't true. And I can give you example after example of that. Another principle, when you go to work in the morning, you ought to go home safe at night. And again, rejecting that false choice that suggests that you either have a safe workplace or a profitable workplace. We just finished the prosecution of a guy who was the CEO of a coal company in West Virginia. And in the aftermath of the Upper Briggs branch disaster, which killed over 24 people, his coal mine was shut down. You don't make a lot of money when your coal mine is shut down. And so again, another false choice. And it seems to me that, I guess the final principle, because I want to sit down and shut up and listen, is something that I heard the president articulate down in Selma about a year ago when he went down to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. And what he said down there was, I think, pretty basic to who we are as a nation, and this is what he said. The most important word in a democracy is the simple two-letter word, we. It is amazing what we can do when we marshal the collective power of we. It is amazing what happened down in Selma in the aftermath. Selma was about ordinary people who did extraordinary things. And every day in this job, I see extraordinary people do extraordinary things. Whether it's the small business owner in my community who's going gangbusters in her business, and she hires folks coming out of prison. She hires people with disabilities. She hires folks that everyone said could never work. It's amazing what happens when folks understand that, zip code should never determine destiny, and everyone in this country is gifted and talented, and we need to draw out those gifts and talents. And when you marshal that collective power of we, when you understand that where we are today isn't the work of the invisible hand and technology and globalization, and we throw up our hands and say we can't do anything about it. Where we are today is a function of choices we have made. And you all are going to be making those choices. And as one CEO said, you know what? The quarter-to-quarter earnings vortex that creates pressures at short-termism, we've got to address that as a nation so that we can indeed build shared prosperity. So I love my job, if you haven't all figured it out, because I get to make house calls. I get to learn from people. I get to see America at its best. I get to see America at its struggles. And you know what? I'll tell you, I have chronic optimism because I'm seeing a lot of folks who have overcome remarkable circumstances to build a better future for their family, a better future for their business, a better future for our community. And if we can summon these better angels and build this movement of inclusive capitalism, and I see businesses all over this country building this movement and growing this movement, the B Corp movement, other movements, I'm confident that we can reverse this trend and address the social compact 2.0 and build an America that truly is a land of opportunity for everyone. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to the questions we're going to get. And I forgot what my speech said, but I just thought I'd just talk to you.
Well, before I invite Ryan and Jennifer up, let me ask you a couple of questions. One is, why is this basic point you've mentioned? And I can say, for us in Colorado, the collaborative spirit is absolutely how we roll, which is when other people win, we win, not the when someone else light gets blown out, we feel brighter. Why is it that you can have a company like Costco, which, again, like Southwest, workers feel better about working there? You can feel it when you go into Southwest. When you go into Costco, you feel when you ride Southwest. Why isn't that better understood?
Well, I'm just starting out. This is my Costco card from 1996. It was after my oldest daughter was born, and we were getting diapers in bulk. I had hair and no replacement parts when we got our Costco card. If you had invested $1,000 in Costco stock and did nothing with it 20 years ago, you'd have $16,000 today, and it has far outperformed its benchmarks on the S&P 500.
Did you invest
in
Costco?
I'm Tom Buy High, Sell Low Perez. And and here's what else they're doing. They leverage their supply chain. So if anyone's familiar with the Equitable Food Initiative, when you go and purchase strawberries at Costco, you will have confidence that the strawberries that you have purchased, that the folks who pick those strawberries are being treated fairly in the workplace. And you see companies like Microsoft who are leveraging their supply chain and saying, if you want to do business with Microsoft, you better have a paid leave policy. And, I see this everywhere, but we also have to be honest about the countervailing forces who are out there and, who believe that, we should be in this kind of winner-take-all world, who believe that, labor unions are, the Antichrist. And, and there is a very, there's a case before the Supreme Court, those of you who, teach labor law, in which the court is likely to overturn precedent of 30 and 40 years in the labor union context. And so we've got some work to do. And that's why I'm spending a lot of time at law schools and business schools and other places talking to tomorrow's leaders, because the Costcos and the new Belgiums of the world, we've got to scale and sustain that and figure out how we make them the rule and not the exception.
So you've got children who are coming up on college, and
I have a college sophomore and a high school senior and an 8th grader.
I think they still qualify as millennials, if we haven't come up with a new term yet. What do you see among younger people as they look out at the economy and the workforce, and does that add to your optimism?
Well, yes, here's why it adds to my optimism. Young people that I have observed wear their values on their sleeve. And I had a number of conversations with leaders out in the Worker Voice Summit. We're talking about cage-free eggs. It is wonderful that that movement has taken off, and people are conscious of what they're eating and how animals were treated. And I want to talk about cage-free workers, and how we make people conscious consumers. So when you walk into a restaurant, you can hit, and we have Yelp, but we've got to take it to scale and understand when you walk in a restaurant, how are the workers treated? What are, take a half a dozen indicia of fair treatment and educate people. And the beauty is, young people, that's what they want to see. They would be aghast to learn about Robert, the permatemp. And so we've got to, there's a lot of things we can do. There's limits to what we can do by regulation. This is a broader movement where we've got to introduce a lot of different tools.
So my last question, then I'll have Jennifer and Ryan to come join us. Where are we in the effort to begin to measure and assess overall, call it good employee practices? This is something that you've been talking about as a consciousness. How do we get that consciousness better assessed and communicated so when people go to a Costco versus another retail establishment that they, have the confidence to know what's going on in terms of employees as being treated right? I mean, you could say people feel it, but how do you see the progress to getting that better measured and communicated?
We are making some progress, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. I mean, the B Corp movement is a good example of a movement that understands that it's not a movement of corporate social responsibility. It's a movement of enlightened self-interest that says that by doing good, you are helping your bottom line, and there's a lot of evidence to support that. But again, there are relatively few publicly traded B Corps, and so the challenge here is scale, and the challenge here is really, I think, educating people, and the challenge is making sure that we make the case. And I'd love to talk to corporations, professors, because there's this notion that you have a legal obligation to genuflect at the altar of quarterly earnings as a result of Supreme Court precedent, and I skipped that class. But I don't believe that, and I've had many conversations with scholars who say that part of what we have to do is understand and educate folks in that area. So we're nowhere near where we need to be, and as a result, people you go to an airport and you have no idea that the person who's unloading your bags is probably a minimum wage worker, unless you're at Southwest Airlines. The most ignored type of employee in the United States, in my judgment, are people who work at airports who help folks who have special needs, and they're taking you through the airport in a wheelchair. Those are tipped workers, and a lot of people don't know that, and they really get screwed, and it's really hard to make ends meet, and I've spoken to a lot of them.
Ryan, Jennifer, why don't you come join us? As people here know, we in Colorado have a tradition of developing great companies. I think Kim is with us, actually, who's with the B Lab. People want to get involved, chat with Kim afterwards. The optimism that you said is represented very well by these two individuals and the companies they've worked with. Let me start with Jennifer, because you've given a lot of love, deservedly so, to New Belgium Brewery.
The second largest U.S.-owned beer company in America.
It started here in Colorado. We had an Entrepreneurs Unplugged event with Kim Jordan. It's on the web.
Jennifer? That's what I was told.
Well, Boston Beer, Sierra Nevada.
Sam Adams is one, and you are two, is what I was told.
And Sierra and New Belgium pretty much go neck and neck.
Well, we're going with you for this company. and if I have any druthers after I go out tonight, we'll get you up to second.
Okay. There's a lot of people in here. You're all over 21, right?
Oh, you got some time afterward?
So how'd you do it?
It starts with the mindset, everything that you guys talked about. Kim and Jeff are the founders of the company, and they started with a mindset of how they wanted to live their life with the company before we even sold beer. One of the stories that they tell is they went up and started developing the core values and belief, and at that time, we didn't include consumers in our core values and beliefs, which is a problem. And then they realized quickly after they started selling beer, like, oh, the consumers are pretty important here, because we need people to buy our product to, keep this virtuous cycle going. But they had it in their mind what they wanted to get out of the company from the get-go. And we were talking about that earlier before we came on, of how many entrepreneurs sit there and think about what do they want to stand for? What do they want the experience to be like for themselves, their family, their employees, their consumers? And that was incredible wisdom to start out. And then, they hired great people, myself and my colleague are here, who had that passion to keep it going, to keep building it and stay dedicated to it. And it's work. There's no magic pill. It's work, and we work at it every single day.
So Ryan, you graduated from CU.
Yep.
Tim Miller, and you founded Rally Software, having been a team in a previous company, you spent a lot of time thinking about this and were a B Corp at Rally. Can you talk about that journey for you?
Sure. Similar back to the start with values. Tim and I had worked together before, so it was pretty common for us to kind of know what we thought was important for both ourselves and for folks who are working with us. So, though in the first company we had a pretty sudden exit back in 1999 that we weren't planning for, and it actually caught me by surprise. We hadn't planned on it, and we had an exit that had a pretty substantial impact on a lot of engineers in the town. And but I noticed, and even in my own behavior at that point in time, that you figured out how to spend the windfall 3 times before you even got it, because you really weren't planning on it, and it was a windfall. And to me, that was actually one of the big things that caused a real change in the thinking for Rally, and that was we really missed a huge opportunity to affect a lot more of the way employees thought, and back to the mindset concept about what we were doing. We had a great company, but we didn't infect it into the employees as well. And so when we started Rally, we set aside 1% of founding equity. We set aside, all the founders set aside 1% of equity. We set aside 1% of volunteer time, and that started a whole other part of these movements that is now called the Entrepreneurs
Have
Foundation.
you heard about this Entrepreneurs Initiative? 1% here in Colorado, we have this Entrepreneurs Foundation trying to get as many companies to commit to that as possible.
So we have over 100 here in Colorado that have committed about 1% of equity that goes back into the community foundation, either Denver, Rose, or Boulder, as a result of their exits, and they encourage 1% of time and 1% of product as a way to do that. Those are now things incorporated in the B Corp certification process, as B Corp is a member of Pledge 1% on a national level, and it's part of that movement. I think it's part of a conscious awakening that says, hey, it's not just a business society that's one way. It's not just a linear flow. It's got to be a whole circle. So,
I was listening to both of you, and 2 reasons why I love Colorado.
Only 2?
I know 2 of many. The thing, though, and I know that there are skeptics out there who often say, well, this is great, but you all are outliers and you're crunchy granola Boulder people. So, I've actually, I feel like this job, I've gotten an MBA like on the job. And I was reading a book called, this is one of my favorite books, it's called Firms of Endearment, How World-Class Companies Profit from Passion and Purpose. And it has a quote from Jeffrey Immelt, who is, CEO of a pretty large, we could call it mainstream, Fortune probably 50 company. And he talked about the 4 keys to success, and 3 of them were pretty straightforward. Execution, growth, having good people, the stuff you think about. But the 4th one is what caught my eye, and that's why I have reason to believe that this phenomenon is something that can and should and is being scaled. And his fourth key to success was virtue. And this is in his words. To be a great company, you have to be a good company. The reason people come to work at GE is that they want to be about something bigger than themselves. The era we live in belongs to people who believe in themselves but are focused on the needs of others. That's your millennial point. It's up to us to use our platform to be a good citizen, because not only is it a nice thing to do, it's a business imperative. This is the CEO of a pretty darn big company. And so to the extent that people might be thinking, oh, that's just great, that I can drink beer and feel good about it. This is really, I think, a very mainstream point of view that we really need to, scale.
So one other idea I'm curious to ask you both on this is, do the employees feel like owners in the enterprise? They have a stake, using the word stakeholder again, or do they feel like, oh, I'm just here now punching a clock? And why does it matter how your employees feel?
I'm going to say I hope that since I greet all of our new employees in the process of boot camp, as we call it, I hope they all came to and figured out very quickly in the first 90 days why they were there. And if they don't have their own understanding of why they're there and what their personal mission is, there's really no way for them to be able to answer that question really effectively. And those things change. And so people, yeah, they do connect with the purpose and they find where their social mission overlaps with the corporate mission, and that's an amazing fit. And that can go on for 1 year, 3 years, 13 years. But it's when they connect, we always jokingly describe, then we get to steal your sleeping hours because you're always working on it. When you're sitting around or when you're sleeping at night, thinking about how can I move that thing forward, and because it moves me forward, it moves my family forward, it moves my community forward, it moves the company forward.
Yeah, for New Belgium, we have an interesting path because we're now 100% employee-owned company through an ESOP. And we weren't always an ESOP, but we were always 100% employee-owned. So we've always had some kind of gain-sharing model. So it's back to sharing in our success collectively, whether it was profit sharing or a phantom stock plan and now an ESOP. There's been some mechanism, some kind of funding effort that if we win together. And so everyone has the profit motive to do that. And so you'll see stories, some of our mechanics, there was a part more complicated. Brewing is actually kind of complicated. So it's more complicated than I can explain, but there was a part and it cost thousands of dollars and they thought, well, we can make this. And they ended up making the part for $5. And so could they have just gone and ordered it from the catalog? Of course they could. That would have been easier. But they chose the better path. And so now we have this there. And so it's when you have that amount of extra effort and they could either save money or they could help drive a little bit of extra revenue, where are they going to choose to place their effort? Because they know at some point it can come back in some way. And we do financial literacy training and business literacy training for everybody. So when our CFO or CEO stands up in front, they know what a COG is. They know if we need to reduce costs for some reason, they know what to do. It's very simple, but it starts with educating and that enabling everybody to be their own version of a capitalist and what that means for them.
And there's a growing body of research that bears out what you're saying. In other words, when workers have skin in the game, businesses profit, everybody succeeds. And they're doing a lot of work on this down at the Fuqua Business School at Duke. And it can take different forms. It can be like Procter & Gamble's had profit sharing for decades. You did an ESOP. You can have a traditional labor union form of partnership. There are other ways to build into that culture. And so again, this is the right thing to do and it's the smart thing to do. And it creates that shared prosperity.
So talent is really hard to find. It's hard and costly to train. Why aren't companies more oriented, first and foremost, around talent as a strategic imperative? Where does this short-term mindset come from, and how have you guys resisted it as you built your companies?
Where does a short-term mindset come from? Impending danger. Maybe is a short-term mindset driver, and so that happens a lot. And I think, how you deal with that is a question. And if you buy into the Jim Collins world of the hedgehog and the fox story, and you know what your hedgehog is, you roll up as a ball and you survive the danger. But if you don't have core values and you don't know your passion, you don't know where you're best in the world at, you don't have a hedgehog strategy, and then when the short-term danger comes, you try to outfox the fox.
And I would just add to that, and I'm not pandering to the teachers and students in the audience, but I think a lot of it comes through education, and I think we are seeing more education institutions teaching business from a holistic perspective. And so then you have more students who will become entrepreneurs, and you'll have that ripple effect of people that know about different business from a different perspective. And I've been thinking about this for New Belgium. I've been there almost 12 years, and we've seen people leave the company and start businesses, and they've taken the lessons that they learned there. And I think, in the long run, that will be one of the biggest things that we can do, is actually build entrepreneurs who go out and start their own businesses. And as much as we want to keep them, it's a better thing for them to go out and start businesses and meet new people and teach new people and take those lessons, and that's the ripple effect there. And the more we can do that, and I'm not saying, I want to.
Now, we in Colorado, and it's going to happen to Rally. Rally gets acquired by Computer Associates. There's going to be an opportunity for people who appreciate that culture to help replicate it, reinforce it, encourage it elsewhere.
Absolutely.
So if people want to ask questions, we're going to start with student questions, part of our culture here. Please put on your cards, and you can bring them up to me when people have them. I want to get back to the B Corp, because that is something that we in Colorado are invested in. Say a little bit about it, and are there other efforts, because the Secretary mentioned this point, we need to do more to help measure and articulate, certify, and champion companies that are committed to a holistic and a conscious leadership that is more than a short-termism. It's really about investing in a range of stakeholders.
Are there others? I don't know if there are others. Maybe Kim would know, but can't think of anything else that stands out.
B Corp is the most promising initiative we have right now, capturing this value, you would say.
I mean, I think there are different GSR reporting structures that can talk about your sustainability measures, especially in a consumer environment like New Belgium, but to cover a service sector all the way to manufacturing center and really be, cross-industry. I mean, we had 4 years of experience with it at Raleigh and had countless CU students help us through that certification program. So
we appreciate that, by the way.
Yeah, 'cause I think the transparency, how many of you guys know about B Corp and have gone to the website? Like, you can look up our scores. You can look up exactly how New Belgium scored, and I think there's a danger, like with greenwashing or culture washing. Culture is becoming one of my least favorite words, and because people use it all the time, and it has different meanings depending on how you want to apply it. But you can look there as a consumer or just an interested party and see how we scored, and it's a rigorous process.
And it gets harder every year.
Yeah.
So for Secretary Perez, we've got a question for you from a student, and I will add my PS to this. Is your department taking steps to publish and promote the benefits of being a mindful business, or are the numbers too hard to quantify? And my PS is, have you thought about developing a challenge to anyone out there, universities for example, to come up with good metrics that capture what we're talking about here?
Right. The short answer is we've done a number of things. We had the Worker Voice Summit that Jennifer attended and a number of other folks attended, and we're attempting to use our bully pulpit to help catalyze this movement. This Friday we're having a meeting of the Conscious Capitalism group at the White House, and Kip Tyndall, who's the CEO of the Container Store, and I are co-hosting it. The challenge of getting metrics, the Department of Education had an effort to get metrics on colleges and universities, and it was met with a flurry of opposition from colleges and universities. And so, we have to, I think that is a big part of the unfinished business. And if I really think we need to figure out, a half a dozen, because it can't be a laundry list of 40 things, but just things that give you, because, consumers can really catalyze behavior modification through their actions, voting with their feet. And, I think we have to do that. We haven't done that but we've begun the conversation. The president articulated his good jobs principles at the summit. We've had further meetings with other companies, but we haven't gotten to the point that's articulated in the question of go on our website and you'll see, what companies in Colorado are doing X, Y, and Z.
Small add-on to that. We were talking a little bit before about ways to think about this, but one that certainly entered the workplace and the tech community is Glassdoor as a service. Glassdoor allows workers to rate their companies in a very transparent way. They're now a recent joiner of Pledge 1%, and as they head towards IPO in that setting. So that's a very simple way to do it without getting all lost up in the metrics, that it actually opens just the way to anonymously give feedback about what it's like to work at a place.
So the question follows your point, Ryan. What if you're working in a place that's a, to use the Secretary's term, screwed up place to work for workers? What can you do? What should you do?
Well, we had an event at the White House 2 weeks ago involving equal pay, and the president did an executive order on equal pay, and I met two courageous women who had gone to their CEO and said, you know what, women aren't getting paid the same as men. And to their credit, their CEO said, I hope that's not happening here, but I'm not afraid of the facts. And sure enough, it was happening there. And they were able to do something about it. And actually now there's a number of state laws that are getting passed on the issue of pay transparency. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was the first piece of legislation that the president signed. And there are a lot of companies that don't have pay transparency, so you don't know what folks are making. And there's a movement now toward that. And so in that particular case, you had a corporate culture where these two leaders felt empowered, and they felt that their CEO was had created a culture where they can go up and air bad news. And so, I hope people who are in that situation, I've always been a big believer. If I got a problem, I'm going to work, first of all, internally to try and fix it. I'm going to try hard. And then, if I'm knocking my head against a wall, I'm not a kamikaze pilot, then I'll move on. But we've got to vote with our feet. And so when we see those sorts of low-road employers, I hope consumers will act accordingly.
Next question you've already also teed up. How do we get more women in senior leadership positions and on boards of companies? I should give a shout out. Sue Hallbrenner's here, one of your former colleagues at Justice. She's leading a accelerator program for women-owned companies. But how do we help drive more women in leadership positions?
Well, by the way, part of the answer, and this is not the whole answer, is we need sensible paid leave laws. You look at the issue of equal pay, and you look at labor force participation of women in Canada and the U.S. in 2000, it was equal. And then you look at it now, Canada's about 8 points higher than the U.S. And the reason is because they invested in paid leave. And if we had kept pace with Canada, we'd have 5.5 million more women in the workplace. 5.5 more women, making the Silicon Valley look more like America and making Wall Street look more like America. That's not the whole answer, but that's part of the answer. And a big part of the challenge of women moving up in leadership is that more often than not is in a family situation is the woman who's making the choice then, because the numbers don't add up, and leaving the workforce when we could benefit from her human capital and considerable talents. And so it's really, this movement has been talked about for a long time, but you look at the numbers and we've barely moved the needle. And this is part of the answer to your earlier question about, how do we move the needle? You talked about B Corps, but you have to have boards that better reflect America, so that issues like equal pay for women and not being afraid, corporate culture, things of that nature, I think they'll get aired with greater frequency when you have boards that look like America.
Ryan, Jennifer, any thoughts?
We're one of my colleagues at work is involved with the Anita Borg Institute, and obviously here at CU, NC Wood is a big piece of that. There's, most of that answer that when I talked to Angela about what we do, and that is it involves, it's a lot of women, but it involves a lot of men helping those people, helping women move up in that situation, and it's the support that's necessary and the empathy to understand that that tends to be the more lead bullets solution to this answer as opposed to silver bullet.
And I agree with you. I'm on a group called Moxie. I'm on the board, and we talk a lot about the role of fathers in daughters growing up, and fathers as leaders of companies, seeing their daughters trying to get highlighted in the workplace, and how challenging it is from a behaviors perspective to do that. And I think we just have to keep up that effort of awareness, because we have to admit to ourselves that there's a lot of bias, and we can be completely unconscious of it, but we need to admit that it's there, and then we can deal with it. But we have to go there first and say, we're not at fault, it's unconscious, we're going to work on it, we're going to move it forward, and we're going to pay attention to it.
The best way to break the bias is with diversity on teams. And when you don't have a representative team that doesn't have a diverse viewpoint, you're going to have even more and more conscious or unconscious bias.
So this is a natural for you, Jennifer. Do ESOP-owned companies as a role operate using the principles of conscious capitalism?
I'd say no. I noticed some of our friends from Namaste are here, and they have a very interesting employee ownership model as well too. But there's research on ESOP companies that show that the ESOP companies that don't have this kind of ownership mentality or don't teach business literacy don't see the returns on their value as well too. So there are companies who put ESOPs in place for various benefits that it provides to selling shareholders, and that's all good too. But when you can put the attitude in and the literacy and the meaning behind it, you can drive shareholder value even more. And in that model, the employees are the shareholders, so there's a huge benefit to that. But if you're not teaching business literacy and all the things that come with it and empowering people to make decisions at their job level, it's not going to make the change. It has to be both. ESOP is just a tool. It's just a mechanical thing. The attitude has to be there first.
So, Mr. Secretary, you talk about this perma-temp worker. The person says that individual could be classified as employed under our current data system. Do we need to do anything to change the definition of unemployment or report it differently so that employees who are really struggling and in a different classification are somehow recognized as such?
Well, we have 6 different classifications of unemployment. You know, the U1 through U6 is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls them, and basically the U6 is the most broad classification of unemployment. It gets the marginally attached, it gets discouraged workers, et cetera. We have talked about how we can better capture contingent workers and workers of that nature. And also, you know, in the on-demand economy, how do we capture folks who are working 2, 3 jobs? And so that's part of the conversation about collecting the data that I think is really important so that we can have a better and more granular sense of the 21st century workforce. Because some people are working 2 or 3 jobs by choice. Some people are working 2 or 3 jobs by necessity. And having a better understanding of that can help drive policy.
That's the next question, which is
Sharing.
waiting for that question, right? How do we come to grips with the so-called on-demand economy? Some call it gig economy, others call it sharing economy, with a range of different opportunities that fall exactly into what you said. For some people, it's a phenomenal way to earn extra money on the side. Other times, it may be, coming at real expense. So,
Yeah.
Obviously, we're in the early days of this, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important, first of all, to understand the data. And most of the studies are estimating that the on-demand economy is somewhere between 1% to 2% of the workforce. It's a conspicuous 1% to 2%, but it's still a pretty small percentage of the workforce. That doesn't mean the questions aren't very important to ask, but it's like when people ask, what's the foreign policy portion of the budget, and people think it's 50%, and it's really, a fraction of that. I've always felt that, that innovation is part of who we are, and we should embrace innovation. And millennials love the flexibility that often comes in the on-demand world. But millennials also love the prospect that if you get in an accident, you've got a safety net. And millennials are often the indestructibles, so they don't think about that. So how do you build a social compact 2.0? And for me, the key to success in the on-demand economy is to continue to foster and promote innovation, but make sure it's inclusive innovation that works for workers and startups alike. And that's why there's a really robust discussion underway about things like shared benefits, portable benefits, things of that nature. The Affordable Care Act is a remarkably important facilitator of job mobility because it has eliminated job lock. And so that's part of, I think, the social compact 2.0 in the on-demand economy. But what about workers' comp? What about other things? And that's why this is a very robust conversation. And for me, the touchstone is, again, inclusive innovation. How do we create new models that will facilitate growth, but also not have people, walk in a high wire without a net?
So Ryan, Jennifer, this question specifically calls out you. What laws or regulations would you say get in the way or are at least frustrating in seeking to accomplish the goals you had in building your companies?
I'm going to have a short answer since business law was not my favorite class. You know, the one thing that hit us in the B Corp process that I think has subsequently been fixed was the notion that as a B Corp, we had to change our corporate structure to a benefit corporation, and these were decisions made at the state level in Delaware, and that took a large proxy vote of 90% coverage to do that. That's a pretty impossible threshold. Through the work at B Lab and working with the state of Delaware, they're working to try to lower that. That was a big hurdle that I ran into, but I can't say that I'm, you know, we talk more like startup visas and H-1B visas, and given the negative unemployment in the tech community, there is a bigger topic for us than anything that I feel like is a blocker. We benefited greatly by the Jobs Act and how it helped us through the storm of 2008 and 2009. We're huge supporters of that, and that was a huge benefit. So I only have positive stories. Sorry, I don't have many blockers. I had to really reach for a blocker.
I know, I feel similar, just that it's the complexity of tax laws and then laws themselves, just in general. If there was ever some way to simplify that, ESOPs are a complicated tool as well, so we have people who study and research and a lot of investment to make sure that we're doing that correctly. So we're a multi-state employer. We also sell alcohol, highly regulated. So it's always trying to navigate and manage in the different states, different laws, different labor laws in different states. So it's just, once you go into business, you're going to have that, though. You're going to have this network of things, and sometimes it's waiting for the government to act. Like, you know there's something on the table, and they're talking about it, and you're like, what, is this going to help me, or can I take advantage of it? But you don't quite know until it's there. So it's patience, I think, and if you have a passion for your business, though, you'll make it happen. You know, it always does.
Another, you want to jump on that?
Well, what we've heard from a number of employees in the on-demand space, but not limited to the on-demand space, is as they build a business model, decisions they make can have an impact on whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. And the test for that is a pretty case-specific test. It's not a simple formula. And there's the test under the National Labor Relations Act, the test under the Fair Labor Standards Act, there's state laws. And so we've certainly had a lot of conversations about that with businesses who are figuring out at the outset those important questions.
So, as you can see, I won't be able to get to all the questions, but a lot of great questions here. Next one, what's the most effective way to motivate employees?
That's a big question. But if I was to give one answer, I think we're a purpose-driven company, so we have a bigger purpose. And because we do so many different things, it allows people to attach themselves to what is more in their line of interest. So we have environmentalism activities that we can do. We have volunteerism in the company. We have the human-based stuff. We have political opportunities and ways to invest. So there's things that people can do based on what they're interested. So they have more resources, and they know that they can be a part of something bigger, and they get to choose on how they invest their time there. So it's up to them. They're self-selecting in, and they like it. Employee beer doesn't hurt.
Yeah. I'm going to tie on the self-selecting piece, right? That they understand what they're walking into, that you hire in a way that has a lot of transparency, and you have the discussion very quickly about fit and how that works. And ultimately, if you're going to operate at this level, you got to have a lot of empathy, and that means you actually have to work with people you like. And I'm guessing that's about the biggest number one indicator of whether somebody's going to stick and stay and really dive into it, is that they actually like the people they're working with, actually feel like they're committed to the same cause, and they're actually moving the needle.
We actually have 17,000 employees. So I kind of think about this question from time to time. And when I got there, we were second last in employee satisfaction. The good news was...
That would be a painful irony, wouldn't it?
Yes, and I have noted that many times. And the good news is that the last 2 years we've moved up more than any agency. So we were the most improved 2 years ago. And then again this year, we moved up. So now we're like 7th or something like that out of roughly 20. And I've always believed that a good leader is a good listener. And and then when you listen, you've got to act. And a lot of I haven't had an original idea in my life. And I pride myself on being a good listener. And a lot of what we've been able to do is a function of good ideas that folks in the front lines had. It's just like Jennifer's story about the employees who saved money on that part. And then secondly, building a culture that enables people to take educated risk and knowing that you have their back. There's a lot of reasons for folks who work in government never to take risk because we live in a world of gotcha oversight. And, we've been able, we won an award in a very informal competition about who was going to be the department that was the subject of the most writers in the most recent appropriation cycle, and that's because we're doing a lot of stuff. And I was proud to win that award. And
how many riders were there?
There were a hell of a lot of them, but we beat them all back. So, we're moving forward on our agenda of opportunity. But, when people know you have their back, then, and you're not going to get dinged if you make a mistake, but you learn from it. I think that really gets people motivated.
So a student here has two questions. I want to ask them both because they're both great. One is minimum wage, and the suggestion is, might it be more effective or move quicker if it could be regionalized? So a federal law with different regions or cost of living so that you might see some movement in minimum wage? That's the first question.
Well, you'd have to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act in order to do that. And then you would violate the Hippocratic Oath of policymaking because there's a substantial portion of people in Congress who want to eliminate the minimum wage, not raise it. So I appreciate that point. But the minimum wage stands for the simple proposition that nobody who works a full-time job should have to live in poverty. That's what it was about. And the 10-10 proposal and now the $12 by 20 proposal, $12 wasn't picked out of thin air. $12 enables the average family with the EITC and other tax credits they would get to be just above the poverty line. So these numbers are not being picked out of thin air. And I think you need that floor to make sure that we're really upholding, one of those basic principles that I articulated. And I talk to companies all the time now who are, the failure or refusal of the Republican leadership to pass minimum wage bills. Now you have this patchwork, and if you have a national footprint, now you've got to figure out what to do in Seattle and what to do in California and what to do in this community and that community. And I've said to folks, A, I'm actively aiding and abetting that movement, and I do so proudly. And B, if y'all had come together in Washington and every president except two since FDR has signed an increase in the minimum wage. It's always been bipartisan because, again, it's Henry Ford economics. And so, what we're seeing with this patchwork across the states is a function of the dysfunction in Congress.
So to end on an optimistic note, the last question is, how does someone who's not in a leadership position in a company be a part of creating this movement for change? I want to give Jennifer first, Ryan, then the secretary can finish off.
Well, I think everybody can be influencers. I think you just have to find that place or be involved with a movement or find the group that you want to affiliate yourself with. Because there's so many opportunities, like to take B Corp, for example, like there's opportunities to promote that. There's opportunities to purchase from companies, and I'm not just saying New Belgium, but there's other companies who are great companies and you can vote with your dollar power, but you can be a part of it and have a voice, but it's finding which issue. Minimum wage is a great one because there's a lot of people rallying around that, and so people can get involved there, but there's also paid leave, there's also health care, there's environmentalism, there's all these places to be involved as a community, and so, it takes work though. Being involved takes work, it takes your time. And I think people can do it in their companies. And one of the things we do is we teach a class called Crucial Conversations because it's not a skill people learn, is to be able to have a difficult conversation. I don't think they teach that in schools. And so we want people to be able to have a hard conversation very gracefully so they can influence each other and decision makers in the company. And so developing your language skills and how you approach an issue so that you can be a true influencer to move it forward and not give up. If it doesn't work the first time, try it again, find a different approach, find a different movement, but there's plenty to attach yourself to.
Right?
So I got to give the commencement speech at the business school in fall, and my talk was on finding your social mission. I think that's one of the answers of, there's a mentality, at least I had it when I was in school at CU, which was my job was to learn so that I could go to work in my 30s and 40s and 50s and earn, and so that in my 60s and 70s I could return. I think that is a fundamentally flawed mental model that is everybody should drop. You should start returning now, and you should figure out why you're here, and you can start. There's nothing stopping you from doing this today yourself.
Secretary Perez, will give you the last word.
You know, I think I'll leave you with a story again because it's relevant to the last question. There's this store in New England called Market Basket, grocery chain, owned by a family, the DeMoulis family. There's two Arthurs, the good Arthur and the bad Arthur, we'll call them for the sake of this conversation. The good Arthur had owned it for a long time, and there was a power struggle within the family, and the bad Arthur took it over. And the bad Arthur decided that I'm going to raise prices and do a bunch of things that were antithetical to the culture that had been in place. And we did a program at the department with a number of folks. And by the way, there's a documentary on Market Basket that you ought to take a look at. The managers, this is a non-union shop. The managers were the first people to say this is not consistent with our values. And then the other employees who, by the way, they didn't have any protection, so they were walking out and they were saying, you know what, this can't be because this is going to hurt our customers, it's going to hurt our workers. Then the supply chain went on strike and said, we're not going to supply your store. And then the customers taped their receipts from other stores. I'm going to a different store. And there was literally, it's a remarkable action by folks, you know, a bottom-up action. And long story short, the good Arthur came back. He was able to buy the company. And this is what he said. And you can go on YouTube and watch this on Labor Day, actually, of 2014. He said, you have demonstrated that everyone here has a purpose. You have demonstrated that everyone has meaning, and no one person is better or more important than another. Whether it's a full-timer or a part-timer, whether it's a sacker, a cashier, a grocery clerk, a customer, a vendor, or a CEO. We are all equal, and by working together and only together do we succeed. That's a pretty good message of what I heard from the folks to my left and to my right. And that's a pretty good message of shared prosperity and how it works. And that was folks, or that was the folks, that was Selma up in Market Basket land, because that was ordinary people who did extraordinary things. And that's why I'm optimistic, because I see folks doing that all the time. And I see leaders like y'all doing it all the time. And I see professors who are instilling that ethic, and deans that are doing that. And you have choices here. The status quo is not something that we have to accept as inviolate. Market Basket figured it out. These folks have figured it out, and so can you. And that's how we can address the palpable anger that we see that's reflected in our broken politics. And it's not just our broken politics, it's our broken economics. Because if more people have less, then guess what? Businesses have less customers. And so, this is a conversation about the soul of our nation and who we are. It's a conversation about the middle class. It's a conversation about our global competitiveness and our economic vitality. And I'm confident that we can turn these examples into the clear rule. And I'm glad you gave me a chance to talk about it.
Wonderful. We are so glad you came here. Keep coming back. Keep going to Colorado. I want to just encourage everyone, before we thank all our panelists, next door we'll have a little reception, and we can have, hopefully those in the community visit with our students. There's a lot of inspiration and ideas there, and we look forward to your next visit back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.